In a world where betrayal can shatter lives, this heart-wrenching tale unfolds as a devoted husband discovers the unthinkable, his wife's infidelity. As the layers of deception peel away, he is thrust into a whirlwind of emotions, grappling with heartbreak and anger. The story takes a darker turn as he seeks justice in a way that can only be described as karmic retribution. Dive into this poignant audio narrative that explores the depths of love, loss, and the consequences of betrayal, revealing the profound impact of choices made and lives changed forever. It was a day that would remain etched in my memory forever. On that seemingly ordinary Saturday night, we gathered around the dinner table, enjoying a meal together. Young Rachel, who often stayed with us over the weekend, was there too. Her mother, Andorra, a widow working as a cab dispatcher, relied on us to care for Rachel while she worked her long shifts. Rachel and my daughter, Orderly, had become the best of friends during their high school years, often spending weekends together. Rachel would come over on Friday nights, bringing a spark of joy to our home, while her mother worked tirelessly. As fate would have it, my ex-wife Marge was also a familiar presence in our lives. Although she knew Andorra well, she had always avoided crossing paths with her, perhaps fearing that Andorra might distract me from my commitments. At that time, I was navigating the challenges of a competitive job market, traveling frequently for work, while Marge took care of the children during the weekends. On Sundays, Rachel would often be picked up by whichever cab driver was available, delighting in the little treats they brought along, much to Orderly's enjoyment as well. But on this fateful Saturday night, everything changed. As we sat around the dinner table, Marge suddenly dropped a bombshell. "Pete, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. When your wife of 10 years declares her desire to end the marriage, disbelief is the first emotion that strikes you. I stared at her, trying to process the shock. "I found someone else, and I want to spend the rest of my life with him," she continued, her tone disturbingly calm. In that moment, with our 2 8-year-old daughters sitting right there, I fought to maintain my composure. I was proud of my self-restraint, even though my instinct was to react with anger. I mustered a weak response, saying something along the lines of, "Well, I guess I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." But Marge dismissed my comment, stating, "No, you'll need to keep the house for Orderly. We're going on a trip around the world, and she can't miss her schoolwork." "Are you kidding me?" I replied, louder than I intended. My heart raced as I tried to keep calm for the girl's sake. It felt like a cruel joke. Marge had decided to embark on an adventure while I grappled with the fallout. I thought back to when we first met, our dreams of exploring the world together. Now, it seemed she had abandoned those dreams in favor of something far different. She expressed her desire to travel while she was still young enough to enjoy it, oblivious to the irony that her choice would take her away from our family. I could only think of the emotional toll it would take on Orderly. It was as if Marge's love for her children had evaporated into thin air. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. To cope, I excused myself and headed outside to prune the roses in our garden. It was a mindless task, but it kept me occupied as I tried to process the turmoil in my heart. After a while, I noticed Rachel and Orderly quietly helping, but my heart sank when I saw them working so diligently together. "Watch out for the thorns, girls. You're not wearing gloves," I called out, trying to keep my anxiety in check. "What's your mom doing?" I asked. "She's upstairs packing," Orderly replied, her voice calm yet tinged with an underlying concern. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and disbelief at Marge's actions. How could she do this to our daughter? I had always believed she was a loving mother, but now I was beginning to question everything. As I watched the girls hold hands and work together, I was struck by how innocent they were in this chaotic situation. Suddenly, I had a thought. Ice cream. "Let's go get the biggest ice cream sundaes we can find, girls." Their faces lit up with excitement, and we headed to a local restaurant to indulge in sweet treats. It took them a while to finish, giving me precious time to sort through my thoughts about Marge's announcement and its implications for our lives. Surprisingly, I realized I felt little sorrow over Marge's departure. Any love I had for her had vanished the moment she chose to leave. My primary concern shifted to how I would care for Orderly, balancing my responsibilities with work and parenting. It was becoming clear to me that Rachel's mother, Andorra, would need to figure out her own challenges while I handled mine. In a moment of desperation, I decided to reach out to my sister, Carol, hoping she could help with the childcare situation. When I explained the mess we were in, Carol's reaction was swift. "What did she do?" she exclaimed. "She ran off with some guy and left you." "Who is he?" "I have no idea, just some Casanova, I guess," I replied. To my surprise, Orderly chimed in with, "His name is Ronald," adding, "He's a library customer." Rachel, too, confirmed that Marge had been working part-time at the library. I explained my pressing concern. I didn't know how I would manage picking up Orderly from school every day. I could drop her off in the mornings, but my work hours conflicted with school dismissal. "Don't worry, Daddy, Rachel's mom is picking me up," Orderly assured me, as if sensing my distress. "It wouldn't be fair to ask her to do that every day," I protested. "Oh, that's not a problem," Orderly responded enthusiastically. "We thought this through. Rachel will stay with us on the weekends, and I'll stay with Rachel and her mom during the week. On Mondays, you can drive us to school, and Rachel's mom will pick us up." Carol, who had been listening in, chimed in with a note of approval. "I think it's a brilliant plan, Pete. Did you ask her?" I hesitated. "No, I've never met Rachel's mother," I admitted. And so, the threads of my life began to unravel and weave themselves anew. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would have to navigate this new reality, not just for myself, but for Orderly and the future we would build without Marge. As I sat in the dim light of the cafe, uncertainty swirled in my mind. Would she agree to this? The cab driver had been persistent, urging my mom to work on Sundays, but she hesitated, citing her concern for Orderly's mother. Rachel chimed in, trying to bolster the case. "Mom, you'd earn more if you worked Sundays." Yet, my mother didn't want to impose on anyone, especially not on Orderly's mom. "What about Rachel's mother?" I asked. "What does she look like?" "I have no idea," Rachel admitted with a shrug. "I've never met her." "Well, it might be time to change that. You need to have a conversation with her soon to see how she feels about this whole plan," Carol chimed in, her tone practical. "Oh, and has Marge moved out yet?" she continued, shifting the conversation back to a more pressing concern. "I'm not sure," I replied. "I think she was packing when we left the restaurant. Make sure to grab some new door locks while you're in town. And call me if you need anything tonight. Frank and I can come over to help, but we have to bring the kids along," Carol offered. "Thanks, Carol, but I think I'll manage. The help I need is right here with me." I gestured toward the girls, who exchanged conspiratorial smiles, the kind that spoke volumes about their shared secrets. After finishing our ice cream, we headed back to the car. It was time for me to inform Rachel's mother that I would be the only adult with the girls that evening and to ensure she was okay with that. These days, you could never be too careful, especially since I hadn't met Rachel's mother yet. I parked outside the cab office and stepped inside, spotting Rachel's mother just as she was leaving. "Hi, I'm Pete Thomas. I'm looking for Rachel's mother," I said to the cab driver behind the counter. Strangely, I didn't even know her real name. We always referred to her simply as Rachel's mother, and Rachel just called her mom. The cabbie gestured toward a door marked Ladies Only with a sign that read Andora's office. Inside, the sound of the TV faded as the other cab drivers focused on the screen. After what felt like an eternity, Andorra emerged, looking stunning in a simple outfit of tight jeans and a blouse, yet she carried herself like a runway model. "Hey, Pete. Is something wrong?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice as she noticed the girls in the car. No, Well, maybe, I replied nervously. I just need to talk privately. As the cab drivers began to disperse, Andorra told them to stay put, and we stepped outside. What's up, Peter? You look a little stressed, she noted, her gaze flickering to the girls again. Marge left me, I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. Talking to Andorra felt surreal, especially since she recognized me immediately. Oh my God, poor thing, she responded, her empathy palpable. Does this mean we have a childcare problem tonight? No, I just wanted to let you know I'll be watching the kids alone this evening. I thought it was important for you to know since we've never met. Her eyes widened slightly. Not a problem at all. Rachel talks about you all the time. She treats you like a father figure and even has a picture of you next to her bed. Really? Where did she get that? I asked, intrigued. Orderly gave it to her, Andorra explained, smiling. Do you want me to take the day off and take care of the girls? No, I just wanted you to be aware that I'm fine with looking after Rachel. I'm sure she couldn't be in better hands, she reassured me, taking my hand. Thank you. Maybe we can discuss the future tomorrow. If you want, I can bring Rachel home, I suggested, feeling a bit of relief wash over me. Ah yes, the future, Andorra echoed, a hint of concern creasing her brow. Don't worry, we can work something out. The girls have plenty of ideas. I smiled, and she seemed relieved. Thank you for being so understanding. I'll see you tomorrow night. And don't worry about Rachel. She's wonderful. With that, Andorra kissed the girls goodnight, telling them to behave. As we pulled into the driveway of our home, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front. Marge stepped out just as I parked, an anxious expression on her face. Where have you been? I've been waiting for hours, she demanded, her voice sharp. I'm here now, aren't I? I replied, my annoyance bubbling to the surface. And who's this guy? If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do it myself. Marge gestured towards the idling Jaguar, and I watched as it roared to life, careening across the street as if ignoring her entirely. I'll just park where that car was, I muttered, reversing into the spot the Jaguar had vacated. Marge huffed, you almost hit me. Oh, you're still here? I thought you left, I shot back, heading for the front door. Aren't you taking your car? I asked, noticing her Nissan was empty while the Jaguar was packed. No point in taking it. We're flying out on Wednesday, she replied curtly, her tone dismissive. Where do I send the divorce papers? I thought but held my tongue as she cut me off. Ronnie's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table, she stated before turning to Orderly and Rachel, chatting as if we were just an everyday family. I didn't want to hear any more. Instead, I stepped inside, the girls trailing behind me. They high-fived each other, the connection they shared sparkling in the air, but I chose to ignore it for now. We settled in to watch TV for a bit before I sent the girls to bed. They went without complaint, a pleasant surprise that indicated they were beginning to settle into this new normal. Afterward, I poured myself a couple of whiskeys, hoping they would help me sleep through the chaos of the day. Sunday morning greeted me with the rich aroma of frying bacon. For a brief moment, I forgot about Marge's departure, imagining she was preparing breakfast. Then, the reality hit me. The room felt different, her presence had vanished, even her family photos were gone. I went to the bathroom only to find her personal items were also missing. Someone had cleaned up while I slept. Come on, Dad. Breakfast is getting cold. Orderly called from downstairs. I headed to the kitchen, where the girls insisted I sit down while they served breakfast, fries, orange juice, and coffee, reminiscent of a hotel breakfast spread. They'd also prepared corn flakes, juice, and tea for themselves. I complimented their cooking, and they beamed with pride. Just as we were finishing, Carol, Frank, and their kids arrived. The atmosphere lightened instantly, the usual chatter and laughter filling the air. The calm was broken as the girls quickly served coffee to Carol and Frank, their enthusiasm contagious. "Okay, girls, time to leave the dishes. Go play with Carol's kids," I encouraged, coaxing them away from the sink, while Carol busied herself with cleaning up. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the warmth of family, I began to feel that maybe, just maybe, we could all find a way to navigate through the storm together. Sipping my coffee, I found solace in recounting the events of the previous day to my friends. They listened attentively, assuring me that they would offer any help they could. Frank, always practical, recommended a reputable divorce lawyer, while Carol took it upon herself to whip up dinner from whatever we had in the fridge. Meanwhile, I spent the day nurturing my roses, enjoying their beauty and serenity. Occasionally, I engaged in light banter with Rachel and Orderly, who joined me in the garden. Rachel quoted a line from the song "It's Been a Good Year for the Roses," a sentiment that resonated deeply with me given the circumstances. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, a cab pulled up, and Andorra stepped out. The girls welcomed her in, and we began to get acquainted. Over dinner, Carol, Andorra, and I discussed the girls' babysitting plan. Andorra confirmed that she would be taking a Sunday night shift at work, earning more than at her previous job. We fine-tuned the details, including the occasional assistance from Carol during school vacations. With a nod of encouragement from me, Andorra called her boss to confirm her extra shift. The swift yes from her boss filled the room with a sense of relief and excitement. Suddenly, we realized that Rachel needed school clothes for the next day, so Carol offered to drive Andorra and Rachel home to pick them up, with Orderly insisting on joining them. As I carried Rachel's bag inside, I asked Andorra if she drove. "Yeah, but since Tony left, I can't afford a car," she replied. I pointed to Marg's car and suggested, "How about using the Micra?" "I can't," she said. "Why not?" I pressed. "She told me to get rid of it," Andorra replied, looking uncertain. "But you'll need it to drive Orderly to and from school," I insisted. "Are you sure?" she asked, surprised by my offer. "Yes, let's call the insurance company and add you as a driver," I confirmed. We dealt with Marg's insurance separately. "His name is Ronald, Dad," Orderly corrected me. "Who cares? He's just Ronald the Rat to me," I shot back, feeling a surge of irritation. "But he's funny and cute." Rachel chimed in, referring to a puppet character from a children's show. I relented and smiled. "Okay, Ronald the Rat it is." In the weeks that followed, we adjusted to our new routine. Carol and Frank often visited on Saturdays, checking our pantry and sometimes cooking lunch. While housework wasn't my strong suit, I managed to keep things organized, and Carol never complained. Weekdays felt lonely, but I gradually found my footing. Fridays became a highlight of my week when I returned home to Andorra and the girls. Often, Andorra would prepare a lovely meal for us before heading to her shift that evening. The hardest moments, however, were when I came home to an empty house or woke up alone. It took time to grapple with the resentment I felt toward Marge after years of marriage. Each morning without her presence was a reminder of the changes we had endured. The complications of the divorce loomed large. Marge and her new partner had left the country, traveling extensively, which made it difficult for her attorney to reach her. I discovered that his ex-wife was demanding child support and had blocked his UK accounts. I did my part by informing Marge's attorney of her whereabouts whenever they reached out. Credit for this information often went to Orderly, who managed to pry it out of me. Whether he understood why I needed that information, I couldn't say. At a court hearing, Marge's solicitor requested another adjournment, claiming they were still waiting to hear from her. The judge, visibly frustrated, turned to me and asked if I knew where Marge was. I stood up and replied, "I'm sorry, sir. I haven't spoken to my wife since she left us." I didn't mention Marge's calls to Orderly every 3 weeks, as the judge hadn't inquired about them. The judge noted Marge's unreasonable behavior for failing to communicate with her attorney and suggested I had grounds for desertion. To my surprise, he granted my divorce and awarded me full custody of Orderly. "I don't see how joint custody can work if Mrs. Thomas can't communicate with her attorney," he remarked. "Mr. Thomas, I grant you full custody and terminate Mrs. Thomas's parental rights with one condition: her attorney must inform her she has 21 days to appear in court if she wishes to contest this." The judge turned back to me, adding, "It surprises me you haven't demanded child support from your wife." "Frankly, Your Honor, I don't see much chance of collecting it unless Marjorie returns to the country," I replied honestly. The judge ordered a nominal child support payment of £100 a month, clearly doubtful I would ever receive it, but setting a legal precedent nonetheless. He advised my legal team to verify any assets Marge might have in the UK. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief. I was now a single man with full custody of Orderly and rights to any property Margie might have in the country, though I never bothered to look for it. On Monday, I noticed an international call on the log from the day before, likely from Marjorie. Oddly enough, neither Orderly nor Rachel mentioned the call or her whereabouts, which was unusual. I pieced together what I could but chose not to dwell on it, focusing instead on our new life together. As time passed, Marjorie's calls to Orderly became less frequent. I wasn't surprised, they were one-sided, with only Orderly occasionally asking about her whereabouts, questions that ceased once Marjorie's boyfriend's divorce was finalized. Somehow, both Orderly and Rachel seemed to have insider knowledge about it, likely through their school connections. About 4 months later, while enjoying a Saturday movie and burgers, Rachel casually announced that she and her mother would be moving soon due to a rent increase. Little did I know that this was part of a grander plan. It turned out that the girls had concocted a scheme for Andorra and Rachel to move in with us. At dinner one Friday, Orderly asked Andorra if she had found an apartment yet. Rachel chimed in with exaggerated horror stories about their apartment search, while Orderly suggested, "Why don't Rachel and Andorra move in with us? We have a spare room." I contemplated Orderly's suggestion. It made sense, it would save Andorra from paying rent and reduce the chaos of our schedules. I looked at Andorra for her thoughts, but she avoided making eye contact, clearly lost in her own considerations. As I sat there, weighing the pros and cons of this new arrangement, I couldn't shake the feeling that life was constantly evolving. It seemed that our little family was beginning to find its footing amidst the changes, and I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, this could be the start of a new chapter filled with love, laughter, and shared experiences. Andorra chuckled, "Oh come on, Pete. You sound like such a prude." I shrugged. "I was just thinking about your reputation." "My reputation? You're joking. I'm already the subject of rumors at my apartment. People see me driving a new car and being away every weekend and think I'm up to something." "Are you serious?" I asked, astonished. "Absolutely. They even wrote to my landlord. I told them I work at a cab company, but the rumors keep spreading." "You need to get out of there," I said, feeling the weight of her situation. "I know, but it's not easy to find an affordable place." "What about the idea from Orderly?" "There's plenty of space here," I suggested, realizing how much Andorra and the girls needed a fresh start. "True," she admitted, "without the girls, this place feels empty, like a morgue. And you're not a bad cook either." "Should I take that as a compliment?" "Yes, definitely. The room is yours if you want it," I offered. Andorra's eyes lit up. "The girls will be thrilled. But we should discuss rent." "No need for that," I insisted. "I'm not a fan of housekeeping, and you're a much better cook than I am. You can handle the cooking, and I'll cover the utilities." Andorra was adamant, "We'll discuss that later." "Are you sure you want us to move in?" "If you're inviting us, then yes. We'd love to." "Then it's settled. When do you want to move in?" "Our apartment is already furnished. Don't worry, most of my stuff can be tossed. I sold the good stuff years ago after Tony left when I needed the money." And so, Andorra and Rachel moved in with Orderly and me the following week. I could see that Andorra was reluctant to share the details of her past, her expression conveying that she would explain things later when the kids weren't around. I was aware that her husband had died in a tragic accident years prior, but the specifics remained a mystery to me. While walking Andorra to the car one evening, I overheard a distinct smack and glanced over to see Orderly and Rachel wearing innocent expressions. It was a moment that made me smile. The transition into our home felt seamless. Most of Andorra's furniture was discarded, but a few cherished items found their way into the house, while others were tucked away in the garage. Her television and music center made themselves comfortable in the girls' room, and soon enough, our house felt warm and inviting once more. My mood noticeably lifted, and I found myself skipping after-work drinks to read bedtime stories to my 2 daughters. My days of traveling for work came to a halt when Marge left, and my boss began sending others on trips. With Andorra's arrival, I felt something stirring within me. I tried to conceal it, but I was undeniably falling for her. She was a year younger than me, always immaculate and bursting with a wonderful sense of humor. She embraced the girls and me without resentment and tolerated my quirks. It was from that very first moment we met that I realized my feelings for her ran deep. Carol, my confidant, was the first to pick up on my emotions. That Christmas, while we were setting the table, she asked, "Have you told Andorra yet?" "Told her what?" I replied, feigning ignorance. "That you're in love with her, you fool," Carol laughed. "Don't be silly. I can read you like a book, Pete. You're more hooked on Andorra than you ever were on Stephanie Mathers." Stephanie Mathers had been my high school crush, the one who left a lasting mark on my heart. Carol and her friends had helped me navigate the pain of that heartbreak. "I care for Andorra, but I don't want to disrupt the balance we have," I confessed. "Peter, she feels the same way about you. Just look at how you both act, like school kids in love. You avoid touching each other. It's either that you hate each other, which I doubt, or you're both in love. You think Andorra likes me?" "Yes, Pete. She's just as smitten as you are, and even the girls see it." "What should I do?" "Tell her how you feel. You've charmed women before. Marge was different." "You never really liked Marge, did you?" "No, I didn't trust her. She had me wrapped around her finger, but those 2 little girls love you." "I never thought Marge did. Marge loved me when we married." "Think what you want, Pete. There's a woman in the kitchen right now who loves you. Find a way to melt the ice." Just as Carol finished her words, Andorra walked in to check on dinner preparations, forcing us to shift our conversation. Throughout dinner, Carol continued to give me meaningful looks and exchanged private jokes with Orderly and Rachel. Over the next few days, I nearly brought up my feelings for Andorra multiple times, but always hesitated. On New Year's Eve, Andorra was working, and Carol and Frank had taken the girls for the night. I found myself reluctantly agreeing to join a party with some office friends. As the clock struck 4 a.m., the party began to wind down. I called a cab, and to my surprise, Andorra answered. "Hey gorgeous, can you send one of the guys to take me home?" I slurred. "Are you out of your mind, Pete?" She replied, a mix of concern and amusement in her voice. I had a hard time deciding which phone to call, I joked, trying to keep the mood light. "Just try not to throw up in the car." Laughing, Andorra responded, "You're a piece of work." Phil, the driver, arrived to help me into the cab. As we drove, I realized we were headed in the wrong direction. "You're going the wrong way," I muttered. "You need someone to put you to bed, and it won't be me," Phil chimed in. "I think I know who will volunteer," I replied, feeling a bit reckless. I must have dozed off, as the next thing I knew, Phil and Andorra were helping me out of the cab. Andorra clung to my arm as we made our way to the door. Once inside, Phil helped me upstairs, and then I felt Andorra loosening my clothes, making me comfortable. Intoxicated and emboldened, I seized the opportunity. As she leaned over me, I slurred, "You know, you're one hell of an attractive woman, Andorra." "What does that mean?" she asked, her brows furrowing in curiosity. "Just that you're good enough to eat, and I'm feeling quite hungry," I said with a smirk. "How much have you had to drink?" she asked, her tone both teasing and concerned. "Not enough," I replied. "But if I had a little more, I'd finally have the courage to tell you how much I love you." And just like that, my heart raced, and the moment hung heavy in the air, waiting for the words to spill forth. "I'd have the courage to tell you just how deeply I love you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Andorra smiled knowingly, a twinkle in her eye. "I'll believe it when I hear it sober. Now, get some sleep. We'll see how you feel in the morning." She stood to leave, but I couldn't resist. I gently pulled her back onto the bed beside me. She didn't protest, and before long, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the window, piercing through my hangover like a knife. Disappointment washed over me as I realized Andorra was gone. I attempted to lift my heavy head, groaning at the effort. "Here, have a drink," I heard her voice call from behind me. "What is it?" I squinted against the bright light. "It can't be poison. Not until you marry me. I need life insurance on you first," she teased, laughter dancing in her tone. I shot back playfully, "How do you know I won't bump you off first?" "You can't. You have 2 daughters to look after," she said with a smirk. "And one of them is yours." "That's true," I replied, recalling how the girls thought of themselves as sisters, with Andorra as their mother figure. "You know, they see you as their father now," she noted, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Speaking of that, I've noticed one of them calling me Mom recently," I mentioned casually. "Really? I hadn't noticed," she replied, sounding genuinely surprised. "And Rachel's been calling you Daddy for a month now." "Really?" I echoed, astonished. "Yes, even Carol and Frank noticed it." "Did you discuss it with Carol on Boxing Day?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her tone. "I discussed a lot with Carol," I confirmed, adding with a chuckle, "Is she already planning her wedding outfit?" Andorra held the drink she prepared for me, a confused look on her face. "So, are you going to marry me or not?" I ventured, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "You didn't ask me," she pointed out, raising an eyebrow. "I wanted to know your answer before I asked. It's less embarrassing if I get rejected," I explained, a hint of vulnerability creeping into my voice. "Well, you wouldn't look foolish if you asked," she mused, a thoughtful expression on her face. But before I could say more, she interrupted me. "I have a confession. I'm not a widow," she said, her voice steady. "Tony's not dead. Legally, I was never married to him." I stared at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Tony was a bigamist. He was already married when he married me, so our marriage is null and void," she revealed. "Wow, so you're not a widow and you were never married?" I clarified. "Yes, it's easier to tell everyone I'm a widow," she admitted, her tone softening. "In that case," I began, but we got swept away in the moment, spending the next hour lost in kisses and hugs, almost forgetting the ache in my head. By the time Frank brought the girls home at 3 p.m., Andorra and I were in the kitchen, brainstorming how to share the news with the girls. It was clear they sensed something had changed. Andorra was almost in my lap as we huddled together. They hugged us both, and when Frank entered, he beamed, "Congratulations." We quickly set a date for mid-February and started planning a modest celebration, though the girls had their hearts set on something more extravagant. In the end, we settled on an intimate ceremony at the registry office, followed by a small reception. Neither of us had many living relatives, and the registry office allowed us to avoid the complications of public announcements, keeping things simple for Andorra, who still needed to navigate her role as a widow. Once Frank went home, Andorra faced the delicate task of submitting her resignation to her taxi company supervisor. She decided she wouldn't work night shifts due to personal preferences, which irritated me a bit because I wasn't fond of sleeping alone. We agreed to keep our separate bedrooms until the wedding, wanting to set a good example for the girls regarding relationships. Still, I began to sneak home for long lunches whenever the girls were back in school, which significantly lifted my spirits. The following weekend, Andorra finished her last shifts at the taxi depot, returning home with an armful of flowers and chocolates from her colleagues. That Sunday night, several drivers and their wives invited us out for dinner at a local pub, creating a delightful atmosphere filled with laughter, making cabs a rare sight in town. Before we knew it, the wedding day arrived. It went smoothly, our girls made the perfect bridesmaids, and Andorra looked stunning in her dress. We spent a single night in the honeymoon suite of the luxury hotel where we hosted our reception, while Frank and Carol took the girls home. Our plan for the summer was ambitious, traveling with the girls across Florida, the Caribbean, and Southern California for 5 weeks, immersing ourselves in adventure and joy. However, a week or two after the wedding, I sensed something was amiss. When I returned home from work, the girls were radiant with joy, but Andorra seemed troubled. After putting the girls to bed, she confided in me, "Does Rachel know Tony isn't dead?" How could she know? I was shocked. We had never discussed Tony in front of the girls. Andorra explained that the girls often hid pictures of Marjorie and Tony in their drawers. When Rachel was asked why, she'd simply said, "We don't need them. We don't want to look at their pictures." Rachel had pieced together that her father hadn't died in a traffic accident, he had run away, though she didn't understand the full story. Andorra chose not to explain further, wary of telling Rachel that she was technically illegitimate. To our surprise, Rachel didn't seem bothered by the truth, which I thought brought the girls even closer together. As time went on, Andorra proved to be an extraordinary wife and mother. She handled the kids and me with remarkable patience, even when things got chaotic at the office. Despite my flaws, Andorra never pointed them out and maintained a wonderful sense of humor, often teasing me playfully. Our evenings, while occasionally tiring, were filled with love and laughter. By early summer, Marjorie's calls to Andorra had almost ceased. Meanwhile, Orderly grew angrier at her mother, becoming more persistent whenever Marjorie did call. Andorra and I had to navigate through that too, especially when Orderly referred to Andorra as new mommy during these calls. Eventually, Orderly switched tactics, sharing stories about our family outings and calling Andorra Daddy's wife and Rachel my sister. We discussed Orderly's behavior but realized we couldn't set strict rules about what she could say. Marjorie had to face the consequences of her actions on her own. Before our vacation ended, Orderly and Rachel began asking if we were really their mom and dad. They left printouts about adoption procedures lying around, subtly hinting at Andorra adopting Orderly and me adopting Rachel. They even found forms to change Rachel's last name to Thomas. After much discussion, Andorra and I decided to pursue both adoptions. Though Rachel's father was absent, he still had legal rights, and our attorney from my divorce case handled the entire process. It took over a year, but we eventually terminated Tony's parental rights and completed the adoptions. Coincidentally, the same judge who presided over my divorce also handled Tony's termination. Legally, we became Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, with our daughters Orderly and Rachel. We considered the possibility of having more children but ultimately decided against it after our marriage, choosing instead to focus on our growing family and the beautiful life we were building together. After receiving a promotion at work, I found myself not only enjoying a more substantial salary but also gaining the privilege of greater responsibilities. This newfound success allowed us to embrace the idea of summer vacations, something I had longed for but rarely experienced in my earlier years. The second year of our marriage was a particularly memorable one, as we spent 5 exhilarating weeks exploring Europe. The following year, we set off to the vibrant landscapes of India and the serene beauty of Sri Lanka, and the next took us on an unforgettable journey through Australia and New Zealand. By our 5th summer together, our daughters, Orderly and Rachel, now both 14, became our little documentarians, capturing every moment of our adventures on video. Our plans for the next trip involved an ambitious itinerary that spanned Canada, the northern United States, and Alaska. We meticulously mapped out our journey, excitedly anticipating all the places we would visit. Around 2 years after our wedding, Marguerite began sending us Christmas cards. These cards bore Canadian stamps, hinting that she and Ronald had settled there, yet they never included a return address, leaving us unable to respond. Marguerite had become a fleeting mention in our lives, and her absence was rarely acknowledged, particularly since she hadn't contacted Orderly in years. As summer approached, we realized our grand plans for the extended vacation needed to be adjusted. The girls pointed out that visiting all the desired locations within our timeframe was simply unrealistic. Even after considerable cuts to our itinerary, we decided to focus on the western leg of our journey this year, saving the eastern part for another time. We flew into Winnipeg on an Air Canada flight in late June and dedicated a couple of days to exploring the rich history and culture of the city. From there, our road trip took us westward to Saskatchewan and then south through the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas. After that, we headed back west and north again through the stunning landscapes of Colorado and Wyoming, where we spent a few nights at a dude ranch. While the horses were a joy to ride, I personally preferred English saddles. They made me feel more secure, especially when the thought of a sudden fall crossed my mind. There are two schools of thought when it comes to riding horses or motorcycles: either stick with it and regain control, or back off and hope to fall safely. The idea of being on a horse or motorcycle with a spinning rear wheel has always felt daunting to me. Eventually, we crossed into Montana, where I found myself in a town I had always dreamed of visiting, one I had likely read about in a classic Western novel. After checking into a local motel, we decided to grab a bite at a nearby diner. The atmosphere was lively, filled with chatter and laughter, until suddenly, a loud crash broke the ambience. A waitress had dropped a tray of food, and, like everyone else in the diner, Andor and I turned to see the commotion. To my surprise, I recognized the waitress. She, too, seemed to recognize me, which likely startled her and caused the unfortunate spill. The poor woman stood there, frozen, eyes wide as she stared at me. Andor recognized her as well, and in a moment of instinctive unity, we both turned to our daughters and said, "Eat your dinner, Rachel and Orderly, there's nothing to worry about." We quickly reassured them, each addressing our own adopted daughter, still habitually scolding our own first even after having adopted each other's children 5 years prior. Curiously, both girls were straining to catch a glimpse of the scene. Orderly recognized the woman first and, with a nonchalant "so be it," returned to her meal. Rachel, however, continued to watch, a thoughtful expression crossing her face before she smiled at me, then at her mother, before resuming her meal. The other diners, having realized the incident involved us, cast curious glances our way, but we chose to ignore them and focus on our dinner. As we left the diner, Andor leaned in and whispered, "I guess the grass isn't as green as it looks." I turned to her, slightly taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "If she's working here, she's likely no longer with Ronald. One of them probably cheated," Andor explained, her voice steady. "Once a cheater, always a cheater." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "But she didn't cheat on us, she left you and Orderly. Leaving her daughter feels like cheating. Either she couldn't stay faithful, or he couldn't," I replied, frustration creeping into my tone. "Does it really matter?" Andor countered. "Only if she tries to cause trouble. Orderly's been through enough." My voice grew firm. "It's too late for her to cause any trouble. Orderly has handled everything better than you have, after all." Andor began to say something, but I cut her off. "Don't say that. I know what the girls are capable of, and honestly, I'm grateful for their cleverness. It's just that sometimes I wonder how far their plans stretch." "What do you mean?" Andor asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Nothing major, really. I just sometimes find myself curious about how far in advance they're plotting everything." I assured her, "But I'm happy with how things are. I just like to think about it." Andor smiled reassuringly as we reached our car. I unlocked the doors with the remote, and the kids scrambled into the backseat. I opened the front door for Andor, but instead of getting in, she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me. The girls in the back murmured and shouted approvingly, teasing with comments like, "Not in public," and "Wait until you're in your room." Despite their playful jabs, both girls exhibited a surprising maturity, shaped by the hardships of their pasts. Rachel's father had passed away when she was just 6 years old, while Orderly's mother had left when she was 8. Suddenly, Andor pulled back from the kiss, glancing over my shoulder. "We have an audience," she whispered. I turned slightly to see Marjorie standing in the doorway of the diner, watching us. "Do you think Orderly should?" Andor began, but I quickly cut her off, focusing instead on the present moment and the love that surrounded us. I caught a glimpse of Marjorie standing in the kitchen doorway, her eyes fixed on us as we exchanged uneasy glances. "Do you think Orderly should go see her?" Andor suggested, breaking the heavy silence. I sighed, knowing that there was no way around this confrontation. "Yeah, I don't think we have a choice," I admitted, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I realized I needed to find a way for Orderly to meet her mother alone, a task that felt monumental given the circumstances. Andor leaned against the car, his voice steady as he spoke to Orderly. "Your mom is here. I think you should go see her." Orderly's expression turned to one of reluctance. "Do I have to?" "She is your mother," Andor replied gently. "You might regret missing this opportunity years from now." With a resigned shrug, Orderly climbed out of the car, casting a few glances back at us as if hoping for reassurance. "I don't want to see her. Maybe Rachel will ride with me," she suggested, her voice wavering. "No, we'll be right here," Andor assured her. With hesitance and a heavy heart, Orderly approached Marjorie, stopping a short distance away. I strained to hear their conversation, but it was like watching a silent film. Marjorie stepped forward, but Orderly instinctively took a step back. My frustration mounted as I noticed that it seemed like Orderly was doing most of the talking. Whenever Marjorie inched closer, Orderly retreated. "That's not good," Andor muttered, and I couldn't help but agree. After a few moments of this stilted exchange, Orderly turned abruptly and sprinted back to the car, slamming the door behind her and fastening her seatbelt with a decisive click. Marjorie had vanished from view, leaving me with a mix of relief and disappointment. I felt an urge to drive away, to escape the tension, but Andor had other plans. She was already halfway to the door before Orderly had finished securing her seatbelt. I waited, my mind racing, for about 10 minutes until Andor finally returned. She glanced at the girls in the backseat before giving me a look that clearly said, "Shut up and drive. We'll talk later." After lunch, our plan was to stroll along the river path and take in the waterfalls that gave the town its name. Despite the hydroelectric dams reducing their original grandeur, the waterfalls still held a certain magic. As always, Andor and I preferred a leisurely walk rather than an exhausting hike, allowing the two girls to forge ahead, creating space for us to talk. "So, what did she say?" I inquired, eager to understand the situation better. "She left him 2 years ago for some waitress in this town," Andor replied, her tone steady. "Just as we suspected. But why she didn't go back to the UK is beyond me. She was left with a motel bill and needed a way to work it off," she continued, shaking her head. "Now she's sharing a room with another woman, both of them working in the restaurant by day and serving drinks at the bar by night." "That sounds like quite the adventure," I remarked cynically. "Well, what else is she supposed to do?" Andor said. "And apparently, she gets herself into trouble every night with some barfly." "There's no need to be harsh," I interjected. "Marjorie made a mistake, and now she's paying for it. Anyway, you'll meet her after she finishes her shift at 6, Andor continued, her calm demeanor unshaken. "You'll have a couple of hours to chat before her bar shift starts." "What am I supposed to say?" I asked, exasperation creeping into my voice. "You want me to sit down and have a heart-to-heart with her?" "Peter, regardless of your feelings, she is Orderly's mother," Andor stated firmly. "She wants to apologize, and I think she genuinely regrets what happened. But it's clear that Orderly isn't ready to accept that yet. In time, though, I'm sure she will. We just need to ensure we don't lose her again." Her gentle tone softened my frustration. "Are you really being magnanimous about all this, especially after what Tony did to you?" I asked skeptically. "Pete, is there any point in going through life harboring hate?" Andor replied, her conviction unwavering. "What Tony did to me was far worse than what Marjorie has done to you and Orderly. For a time, I hated him and the other women he deceived. But one day, while sitting in the waiting room at the police station, I realized we were all victims, caught in the same trap. We had all been tricked and were not to blame for what happened. So instead of bitterness, we became friends. What's the point of cursing him?" Andor added with a shrug. "If he shows up, I'll report him, but I refuse to waste my energy on hate. I have more important things to focus on." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right. If Marjorie hadn't run off with that, what's his name? Where would we be now?" "Exactly," Andor replied, her eyes brightening. "Now let's hurry, it's 4 o'clock. I found myself waiting in the restaurant parking lot as Marjorie finished her shift. When she emerged, she was accompanied by a dark-haired woman who scrutinized me before heading off on her own. Marjorie looked nervous, nothing like the confident woman I remembered from years ago, laying down the law in our kitchen. Yet, even in her unease, I couldn't deny that she was still quite attractive. "Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming," Marjorie greeted me, her voice tentative. "The bar must be quiet now. Why don't we go there and talk?" she suggested, a hint of hope in her eyes. I didn't respond but gestured for her to take the lead. As we walked to a booth in the back of the bar, it was clear we were expected. I noticed the dark-haired woman behind the bar, chatting with the bartender, as we entered. All the booths next to ours were empty, amplifying the intimacy of the moment. The dark-haired woman approached and set 2 beers on the table before whispering something to Marjorie in Spanish. Marjorie nodded in response, and I realized she had picked up the language during her time here. "You wanted to see me," I said, reminding her that I hadn't initiated this meeting. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter," she finally whispered, her words barely escaping her lips. In that moment, I sensed a mix of relief and trepidation, but I replied, "No, you've done me a great favor. I wasn't cut out to be a bloodthirsty diplomat." "Yes, Andor got the better end of the deal," Marjorie said bitterly, her admission hanging heavily between us. "I should have seen it coming. She clung to you as soon as I was gone," Marjorie said, her voice laced with bitterness. But the truth was, it was the other way around. The moment I set my eyes on Andorra, an inexplicable connection sparked within me. I hesitated, unsure how to articulate my feelings. Perhaps if I had met Andorra before Marjorie decided to leave, the outcome would have been different. But maybe that was just wishful thinking. Deep down, I doubted I could ever act so selfishly. Duty and other obligations seemed to bind me in place. Sometimes I wonder if this is a failure on my part. "What happened to your lover boy after all?" I asked Marjorie, seeking clarity amidst the confusion. "And where did that creep get all his money?" "You know how it goes, he left his wife and kids high and dry, swindling every last penny he could," she replied with a sardonic laugh. "Ronald's money? What a joke. It's more like everyone else's money. He's a crook, Peter, wanted by law enforcement everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me." She paused, her gaze drifting off as if lost in a memory. "I helped him with a few scams, and we had to hightail it out of Argentina when my picture hit the local papers. I think he crossed over into Canada when he realized the FBI was hot on his trail. Rumor has it he was at a motel with one of the waitresses from the diner. Ironically, I'm now in the same position as that waitress. Weren't the feds after you, too?" I pressed, remembering the whispers I had heard. "Pretty much," Marjorie admitted. "But I struck a deal with them. I agreed to testify against Ronald if they caught him. They gave me a slap on the wrist, 2 years of probation for aiding a fugitive. I'm stuck in the country until they nab him and have to check in with the authorities every week. But it's not a burden, Buster, the deputy sheriff I report to, is usually at the diner or hanging around here. Are you still buried in debt? I asked, concerned about her financial situation. Drowning, she confessed, her voice heavy with regret. I had to sign over nearly everything, including Ronald's rental car. That woman drove off with it. I've almost managed to pay it all off, but there are still a few thousand left. No, Pete, you can't. Marjorie protested as I reached for my checkbook. For once in your life, just do as you're told. I'm serious, Marjorie. I'm writing you a check for $5,000, about $10,000. This should get you out of debt and give you a cushion to lean on if you ever decide to return to the UK when they catch him. We'll help you settle down. I paused, my voice firm. But don't think this gives you the right to interfere with our family. You know the courts have stripped you of all parental rights to Orderly, don't you? Marjorie nodded, the weight of reality settling in. She made that clear to me this morning. I'm sorry. That wasn't why we sent her, I said, trying to ease the tension. I realized that when Andorra walked into the kitchen. Pete, I was foolish. I never intended to hurt you or Orderly. I got swept up in Ronald's wild stories. It just wasn't worth it. I sighed, a mix of relief and frustration. I assure you, Marjorie, that was a long time ago. I'm just glad you're safe. But Orderly and I have a new life now, and you're no longer part of it. Andorra and I will do our best to make sure Orderly keeps in touch with you. That's more than I deserve, Peter, Marjorie said, shaking her head in disbelief. And I really don't deserve this check. Well, you'd better take it. It'll ease my conscience a bit, I insisted. Tomorrow morning, when we leave, let's swing by the diner for breakfast. Maybe we can get Orderly to talk to you one last time. I don't deserve your kindness, Peter, she repeated, her voice wavering with emotion. No, Marjorie, I interjected, my tone firm but gentle. I had to make my point, even if I tried to convince myself otherwise. But you are Orderly's mother, and there's nothing I can do about that now. If you don't mind, I'd like to get back to my family. I stood up, signaling that our conversation had reached its conclusion. I'm sorry, Pete, she whispered, her voice filled with regret. I walked away without looking back. When I found the girls, they were waiting for me with wide eyes, breathless with excitement. I pulled Andorra aside, filling her in on my conversation with Marjorie and the money I had given her. She doesn't deserve you, was all Andorra could manage to say about Marjorie's attitude. That's pretty much what she said, I replied, leaning down to kiss my wife. But I wanted to help. Later, I contacted Orderly, preparing myself for the you only have one birth mother talk, but she interrupted me. Andorra and Rachel are already here. From that moment on, the conversation took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Orderly stated she would talk to her mother the next morning and insisted that either Rachel or I be present. When I inquired about her reasoning, she simply replied, one of us was always there during the funeral. I didn't know how to respond, so I left it at that. The next morning, I saw Marjorie, Orderly, and Rachel at a nearby table, engaged in conversation for what felt like an eternity. I assumed her friends were covering for her, as I was certain she had work obligations. The only fragment of their discussion that reached us was the girls enthusiastically chatting about how well the roses were blooming in their garden, smiles lighting up their faces as they spoke. As we drove away, Marjorie walked over to the car, leaning in to kiss both girls goodbye. She then turned to Andorra and me, saying something that caught me completely off guard. These two are incredibly lucky to have found themselves the best mom and dad in the world. Her unexpected words left me speechless as she turned and hurried back into the restaurant, perhaps needing a moment to gather herself. I kissed my wife, still processing the surprise of Marjorie's statement, then we got into the car and headed north toward the Calgary border. I caught a glimpse of the kids in the rearview mirror, their eyes filled with excitement and innocence, and I felt a renewed sense of hope for our future together. I don't think anyone was looking back or particularly reflecting on the fact that we had left that town behind us. After our return home, Marjorie continued to keep in touch, and Andorra made it a point to write to her regularly. We never found out if the FBI ever managed to track Ronald down, but less than a year later, we received news that Marjorie was planning to marry her deputy sheriff, or whatever his name was. During a family gathering, after much deliberation and heartache, it was ultimately decided that we would decline the invitation to her wedding. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be there, so I slipped away on my own for a few days to attend the ceremony. I can't explain why, but something compelled me to go. Buster, as everyone called him, turned out to be a genuinely nice guy once I got to know him better. He picked me up at the airport and introduced me to all his friends and family. Through our conversations, I learned that Marjorie had been very honest with him from the start. She confessed everything she had done and expressed deep regret for her past actions. It was revealed that Buster had even arranged for several of his trucker friends to send her Christmas cards from various cities in Canada. It seemed to me that Marjorie was trying to shield us from the reality of her situation. It felt a little strange to give my ex-wife away at her wedding, but someone had to take on the role, I suppose. Perhaps that was part of the reason I felt compelled to go, maybe to somehow put an end to the whole saga. I doubt that Orderly and Rachel figured out where I had disappeared for those 5 days, although, knowing them, they could have. They were always one step ahead of me, and to be honest, they still are. Over the years, we received updates that Marjorie had welcomed 2 boys into her life. We've seen pictures, but we've never met them. Now that they are older, I believe the boys have somewhat regular contact with Orderly and Rachel, but my daughters rarely bring them or Marjorie up in conversation. Interestingly, Orderly and Rachel ended up marrying 2 brothers. Sometimes, I can't help but feel a tinge of sympathy for these poor girls. The bond between them remains incredibly strong, and they definitely play significant roles in their marriages. Whenever our 2 daughters are plotting together, it feels like it takes a miracle for a man to come out on top. I don't think I've ever succeeded in that regard. Both girls now have 2 children each, and suspiciously, the timing of their births is remarkably close, both in terms of dates and in their physical resemblance to each other. Andorra and I have loved watching our grandchildren grow and develop personalities strikingly similar to their mothers. Last year, I retired from my role as managing director, and now Andorra and I are enjoying an 8-month round-the-world trip. We've been contemplating whether we might find a new place to settle down, but honestly, I suspect our daughters and their families will eventually pull us back to the UK. We haven't sold our house. The girls wouldn't hear of it, especially because of the roses. God knows how much time they spend there tending to the garden, but we receive regular updates. Just this morning, while checking the mail, I came across a picture of my garden from them, titled, "It's been a good year for the roses. Life goes on, and so do we."